Mother's eyes were closed when she died, but a moment later they cracked open and remained open. Your Majesty, please hold the eyelids and try your best to close them, Dr. Sun Pao Tian instructed. My hands trembled as I tried. Wrong, my sister said that Mother meant to close her eyes. She had waited for me for too long. Mother did not want to interrupt my audience. Try not to trouble people, was Mother's philosophy. She would have been disappointed to know that she needed help to close her eyes. I wish that I could disregard Nuharu's order and bring my son to bid a final goodbye. It shouldn't matter that Tang Chi is the Emperor of China, I would have argued. He is my mother's grandson first. I turned to my brother, Kuei, sighing, and asked if Mother had left any words for me. Yes, Kuei saying nodded, stepping back and standing on the other side of Mother's bed. All is well. My tears came. What kind of burial ceremony do you have in mind for Mother? Wrong asked. I can't think of that right now, I replied. We will discuss it later. No, Orchid. Wrong protested. It will be impossible to reach you once you leave here. I would like to know your intentions. Mother deserves the same honor as a Grand Empress Lady Jin. I wish that I could simply say yes, but I can't. Wrong. We are watched by millions. We must set an example. Orchid, Wrong burst out. You are the ruler of China. Wrong, please. I believe Mother would understand. No, she wouldn't, because I can't. You're a terrible daughter. Selfish and heartless. Excuse me, Dr. Sun Pao Tian interrupted. Your Majesty, may I have you concentrate on your fingers? Your mother's eyes will remain open if you stop pressing. Yes, Doctor. Harder and steady, the doctor instructed. Now, hold it. You are almost there. Do not move. My sister helped to hold my arms. Mother's face in repose was deep and distant. It's Orchid, Mother, I whispered, weeping. I couldn't believe she was dead. My fingers caressed her smooth and still warm skin. I had missed touching her. Ever since I had entered the Forbidden City, Mother was forced to get down on her knees to greet me when she visited. She insisted on following the etiquette. It is the respect you deserve as the Empress of China, she said. We rarely had privacy. Eunuchs and ladies in waiting surrounded me constantly. I doubted Mother could hear me from where she had to sit, 10 feet away from me. It didn't seem to bother her, though. She pretended that she could hear. She would answer questions I hadn't asked. Gently release the eyelids, Dr. Sun Pao Tian said. Mother's eyes remained closed. Her wrinkles seemed to have disappeared, and her expression was restful. I'm in the mountain behind you. Mother's voice came to my mind. Like a singing river, you break out to flow freely. Happily I watch you, the memory of us, full and sweet. I had to be strong for my son. Although Tang Chi, who was 7, had been emperor for 2 years since ascending to the throne in 1861, his regime had been chaotic. Foreign powers continued to gain leverage in China, especially in the coastal ports. At home, peasants' rebels called Taipings had spread through the interior and overrun the province after province. I had struggled to find a way to raise Tang Chi properly, yet he seemed to be so terribly shattered by his father's death. I could only wish to raise him in the way my parents had raised me. I am a lucky woman, Mother used to say. I believed her when she said that she had no regrets in life. She had achieved a dream. 2 daughters married into royal families, and a son who was a high-ranking imperial minister. We were practically beggars back in 1852. Mother often reminded her children. I will never forget that afternoon at the Grand Canal when the footmen deserted your father's coffin. The heat of that day and the smell of rot that came from my father's corpse stayed with me as well. The expression on Mother's face when she was forced to sell her last possession, a jade hairpin that was a wedding gift from our father. It was the saddest I had ever seen her. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. And yet, we're just going to get it out the way. I'm wearing a full face of makeup. Why am I wearing a full face of makeup? Because on the evening I'm recording this, I'm going to the symphony. And typically when people go to the symphony, they dress. So I don't dress up and do the full face thing very often. Especially since I don't travel for work the way that I used to, which I have a feeling is going to change in the first and second quarter. Can you tell I'm corporate? That's when I used to wear makeup all the time. But since I was, had the whole thing on today, I was like, yeah, let's use it and read some elegant writing. We are returning to the world of Empress Orchid. Last time we read from Empress Orchid by An Chi Min. We are today diving a little bit deeper into the companion book, which continues the story of Empress Orchid, which is The Last Empress, also by An Chi Min. This is a fascinating book. Now, I think I said this in the first An Chi Min video, which we started by looking at some of the history that was written into the second book. She is a fantastic author, very fluid writing, easy to follow. You know exactly who you're supposed to cheer for, who you're supposed to boo, and who's kind of in that middle path in life. It's very obvious. Her writing is so good that she can easily transport you into a situation, much like Lisa C. In that last book, Amy Tan's Circle of Women and Lisa C., there's a scene about 3/4 of the way through the book. It's very well written, but it's going to piss you off if you are a human with any feelings. And I will say that some of An Chi Min's writing, she's very good at describing what women who are in imperial life go through. Their trials, their frustrations, for lack of a better word, the gilded prison that they're in. Even if a woman is to attain the rank of empress, she is still a prisoner of the country, basically. So it's not so much a warning, but just a, hey, if you can't handle things written in a way that fully let you know what's going on, I am trying not to get my video kicked off of YouTube. Let's just say some of the scenes in these books would be shocking if you were raised in a puritanical life. And I don't think she puts those scenes in there to be salacious or even to be enticing. I think it's there to demonstrate the realism. Like, how in movies, like, you come across a scene and it's one of those, you know what I'm talking about, don't make me say it. And it's like, did that belong there? Because it's not that the act itself, there's anything dirty about it. Absolutely not. But when it's forced, it's like, ugh. But when it serves the story, when it serves the purpose of the characters, then you can accept that kind of writing and storytelling. I would argue that the movie Precious is a really good example. There's some scenes in Precious that are like, oh, oh, oh. They put the oh, but you don't fully understand the character of Precious if you're not forced down into that world to experience life through her eyes and really be forced to understand why she ended up the way she did and how really it wasn't her fault. Everyone around her put her in that position. And that's what's going on in Empress Orchid. The women who are central to these stories, as we've discussed in many other videos, one of the reasons I love the stories of women in ancient China, which I guess 1861 doesn't count as ancient anymore, modern history, I guess we would call it, because we're getting into communist revolution territory with this book. One of the things that attracts me to their stories so deeply is they have an experience of womanhood where from the outside in, society gave them so little to grasp for. Every society, I think, every culture has had its ups and downs when it comes to women's rights and children's rights, or the rights of the working class, the rights of the poor, the rights of the not wealthy. But being a woman, I am particularly interested in the women's stories, and the stories of these women from ancient China, to see what they went through, that most of them had no options. It didn't matter if you were the highest woman in the country or the lowest maid in a brothel. A woman was a woman. And they had to find ways to unite together to create their own society and survive in the best way possible. And there are some things that Empress Orchid indulges in, not for the sake of she enjoys them, but because she has to. Otherwise, she'll lose her position. I'm talking in circles. What do I mean by all of this? In the last novel, we explored Orchid herself and how she almost came to be in the palace. We understand that she was from a decently respected family, but she was not raised the Chinese way because her family actually isn't Chinese. They're from a different clan that is outside of what at that particular point in time would be considered full-blooded Chinese. So she was raised much differently to women inside of Imperial China because her family was descended from a clan from the Nuharu clan. She was able to have freedom growing up that most women didn't have. Like, her feet were unbound. Things like her, she was allowed to play outside growing up. She was able to learn to read, to write, that type of thing, which was unheard of for girls. Like, her feet should have been bound. She should have been in the upper rooms. She should have been learning to sew, knit, and she did learn all of the house stuff. But she was allowed to let sun touch her skin. She was allowed to play with her brother. It wasn't improper or indecent. She was allowed to experience the wider world before she became a married woman. When her father passed, of course, a woman with 3 children, in that world, they had no status. All of their last pennies were being spent on adhering to culture and social requirements to see that the head of the household had a proper burial. And fortunately for Empress Orchid, I'm sorry, I gave y'all the wrong clan, not Nuharu. She's from Yihonala. Am I going to go back and edit that? No. I'm just correcting it right now. But yeah, she's from the Yihonala tribe. But luckily for her, when they are abandoned by the footmen who are carrying her father's casket, when they are at their lowest, someone recognizes who this family is and helps them. And they even look at her and they're like, "You're pretty. How old are you?" Like, you don't need to be out here just wandering the streets. And we'll go back to Empress Orchid in a future reading, but she's so attractive, so well educated, so unique to other palace girls that she is given an opportunity to become one of the members of the imperial harem. Now, we saw this in Ru Yi's royal love in the palace. Just because you're the emperor's favorite doesn't mean jack in this world. The harem is its own society apart from the entire world. The empress, whoever is chosen to be the sitting empress, the paired phoenix and dragon with the emperor, she rules the harem. Period. Full stop. She may have kids. She might not. Doesn't matter. She's the one who's in charge of all of the women in the imperial harem. Interestingly enough, however, a woman can be raised to a position of being even a co-empress or empress above the previous if she produces the heir. And the way that the heirs were chosen through Imperial China didn't necessarily mean the first son. It was the son the emperor picked, because when you got 1,000 wives and concubines, you're gonna have more than one son. Even if it's only 2, there's still more than one. Some of them babies could be born on the same day, in the same moment, in the same bed, by 2 different women. Like, that's how prolific the emperors were supposed to be. It was rare that an emperor did not take on additional wives and concubines, because part of his job as the ruler of China was to produce as many of him as possible. He's just supposed to be out there cloning himself, and that's why he has access to so many women. The more women available, the more wombs available, the more babies are produced. That's, again, not a disparagement on that society. We evaluate works within the context in which they are written, and we appreciate the historical context in which they are written, because it helps us learn. It helps us see where we've come from, and even what we have yet to aspire to. So the emperor he has a job. He has to produce an heir. And Orchid of the Yihonala clan, when she's brought in, there's a whole lot of drama that goes on during her rise to empresshood. We'll get to that later. But she does eventually produce a son. And because of that, she's elevated to the rank of empress. And because her son is chosen as the crown prince who's going to rule next, for whatever reason, we'll get into why he's the crown prince in the other book, but because her son is going to be the next ruler of Imperial China, she's not just an empress, she's an empress dowager. She's the ruler of the ruler at that point, which puts her up above the previous empress. However, this is Confucian society. And note the date, we're in the late 1860s at this point. The seeds of the communist revolution are being sown. There's a lot going on around China, Russia, those Eastern European countries, the Middle East, North Africa at this point in history. If you ever wondered why China and Russia are so connected, you got to investigate Russia. It is the most interesting country from a genealogical and anthropological perspective, especially when you start looking around Siberia and the Yakut region, Mongolia, which is not part of Russia, but, in between China and Russia. When you see these people who have a certain physical appearance, and yet their culture is not what you expect it to be, like when you encounter people who are Russian by birth, by blood, there is a stereotype in my part of the country, which is why a lot of men think they're going to go over there and pick up a wife that does all these things for them. That's a whole other discussion on a different type of channel. But they encounter women who, yes, have very traditional values, but they're not the traditions they were expecting. Russian culture is far closer to Asian cultures than it is European cultures. They're, because of trade throughout medieval times, and those regions become heavily connected because of trade of spices, trade of opium, trade of textiles, precious stones and jewels, and that type of thing. Their cultures became very much intermingled over hundreds of years. So if you encounter someone who is ethnically Russian, they're going to have some Asian ways about them, and vice versa. When you meet someone who is Mongolian, when you meet somebody who is Siberian, I'm separating that from the rest of Russia, because go watch some of those channels that are centered around, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Had a huge obsession with it for a while there, but go watch some of those channels on YouTube where people explore life, particularly in Yakutia and Siberia and the part of Russia that connects into China, that connects into Tibet and all that. It is a very unique social structure there. And you'll see people that physically look very Asian, potentially very Chinese, very Mongolian, but they have a culture that is a blend between Russian culture and different Asian cultures. And it is absolutely beautiful and fascinating. And that's the kind of world that Yihonala, Empress Orchid, has come from. She's from the part of China, Asia, where she got a little bit more freedom. It's a little bit more Russian than it was Chinese. Wow, the light just changed quite a bit, and I don't know why. But she's a little bit more Russian than Chinese. And at this time, when we're looking in the late 1860s, this is when we're starting to see some of those enigmatic, just notorious leaders from the past start to rise. And it helps you understand why Russia and China in modern day are the way they are. Because you have to remember, these are both mass and land mass wise and population wise. China beats Russia, obviously. But culturally and historically, these are massive countries that have been ruled by imperial families for hundreds and thousands of years that shifted to a non-imperial rule, to communism as we know it today, to people's republics. How did that happen? How did they go from countries that had tight familial rule through emperors and empresses, through czars, and then it's not that way? How did we go from a Confucian culture where everyone knew exactly who they were in society? They adhered to the rules of Confucianism. Everybody studied them. And for whatever place you were born to in the society, you showed up the way you were supposed to be. If you were a girl born to a farmer, this is what you were going to be. This is how you were expected to behave. Do these things. If you were a boy born to a scholarly family, this is how you should be. This is how you should behave. This is the kind of girl you got to marry. Here's how many children you need to produce. Like, it was all laid out for everyone. If you're in the imperial family, here's how each of you, based on rank, is supposed to behave. Who has to bow to who, blah, 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 blah. All of it's laid out. And I would argue that there are aspects of an imperial rule and a socialist rule that are very similar. There is still a centralization of power, but the distribution and access to resources greatly changes when you change regimes. And that's what makes this work so fascinating. The journey that Orchid takes isn't just the journey of a young woman who goes from being, daughter of, dead magistrate to imperial harem to, there's lots of books that explore girls who went from I'm nobody to I'm in the harem now for the emperor. She's at a unique point in history, and Empress Orchid is based on a real person, the last empress of Imperial China, and that was Empress Shiji. But because of the way her reign influenced her son, who was the emperor, and other events, she was eventually just kind of wiped from history. If you go to where she's buried, her name has been carved off the stone. Like, she never existed. And that's a big deal, because if you know anything about Chinese history, one of the reasons we know so much about Chinese history is they wrote everything down. Like, everything. So, like, we knew who had tea at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday in 1427. That's how meticulous the records were. So for someone to go from being Empress of Imperial China to have done all the things it takes to rise through the ranks of the harem, to eventually get the opportunity to be with the emperor and produce a son to be the Dowager Empress, and they wipe her name from the history books? what happened? How did we get here? It is such a fascinating story. So now we're at the beginning of the last Empress and the beginning of the end for Empress Orchid. What's interesting is she seems to know the end is coming. So her mother has passed, but unfortunately, if you become the Empress of China, they replace your family. And I think that's one of the weirdest things about Confucian culture that I just simply can't understand. There is just this willy-nilly replacing of family members. Like, say you were the second wife or the concubine of an important man. Or he wouldn't even have to be important, just of a dude. And you produce a son. The first wife has the right to claim that son as her son. And literally like, ooh, bing, bang, boom, we said it. This is her kid now. And you're extra. I don't get that. And Empress Orchid, once she, especially after becoming empress, but these are not women who are allowed to leave the palace. She's only allowed to go home because of her position once in a while and visit her mother, but it's under very strict supervision because the chasteness of a member of the imperial harem can never be questioned. But when her mother dies, she's not allowed to bring her own son to be a part of that. Typically when people pass, all of the family's involved. Through the funeral, the mourning, wakes, and all of that happen. You know, I'll get slightly personal here. A couple of years ago, a very dear friend of mine passed away. And while all the medical things were going on, I was helping her daughter and her grandson, you know, just navigate that process, not to get too deep into the details. But I sent the grandson to go stay with friends while the worst was happening. But then when it was time and the worst had happened and they took all the medical stuff off of his grandmother, we had him brought to the hospital so that he could be there because he was very close to his grandmother. She was a huge part of his life, and he was only 10 years old when she passed away. And he's about to be a teenager now. It's a big deal to purposely exclude close family members from moments like this in family history. But why does she have to do that? Well, she kind of says it. Nuharu's not going to let her. Nuharu is the empress that's above her. Nuharu was the recognized wife of the emperor before Yihonala had a son. And she still retains a lot of control because the Nuharu clan holds a lot of control. A lot of these women that were given to the emperor as wives and concubines, it wasn't for their own good. Most of the time it was so their family had a come-up option. If the girl gets elevated, if the girl has a baby, if the girl does this and that, it heaps riches and protection upon our own clans and families. And that's why people willingly gave their girls to the palace and hope for the best, even if they never saw the emperor. Just the fact that they were in there sometimes could grant extra protections, rations, land, whatever, to the family members outside of the Forbidden City. And Nuharu is still in a position of power, and she does not allow Orchid, Yihonala, to take her son to this important family moment. And that sets up the dynamic for the rest of this book. Who's in charge? Who's pulling the strings? It's so much intrigue. And what makes it fascinating is these are two women who have basically gone through the same thing. And Nuharu has done that thing you can do in Confucian society and basically decided that Yihonala's son is her son. We're raising him together because I'm allowing it. But you were also a put-upon woman who was dragged into this culture, this society, this farce called the harem. And they always seem to keep doing to other women what was done to them. And exploring why that keeps happening is absolutely fascinating. Orchid's sister Wrong does not jive. She's like, I don't care that you're the empress. Because you're empress, you should be able to make funeral arrangements. She should be buried like any other Empress mother. She should have the same rights and privileges and be buried honorably. Where is my nephew? Why is he not here? She doesn't understand. There's rules in that their palace. And that's what was really binding about Confucian society. Everyone, even the emperor, had rules. And I think that's what really marks Confucian society. There was a rule for everybody. Everybody. And not even the Empress of Imperial China was above the rules. And Empress Orchid walks us through this delicate war dance between two women in a tug of war for control of China during the dying breaths of the imperial dynasties. As Emperor Xianfeng's senior wife, Empress Nuharu attended my mother's funeral. It was considered a great honor for my family. As a devout Buddhist, Nuharu disregarded tradition in accepting my invitation. Dressed in white silk like a tall ice tree, Nuharu was the picture of grace. I walked behind her, careful not to step on her long train of her robe. Chanting Tibetan lamas and Taoist and Buddhist priests followed us. Making our way through the Forbidden City, we stopped to perform one ritual after another, passing through gate after gate and hall after hall. Standing next to Nuharu, I marveled that we had finally found some measure of harmony. The differences between us had been clear from the moment we entered the Forbidden City as young girls. She, elegant, confident, of the royal bloodline, was chosen as the emperor's senior wife. Empress. I, from a good family and no more, from the country and unsure, was a concubine of the fourth rank. Our differences became conflicts as I found a way into Xianfeng's heart and bore my son, his only male child and heir. My elevation in rank had only made matters worse. But in the chaos of the foreigner's invasion, our husband's death during our exile at the ancient hunting retreat of Jihol, at the crisis of the coup, we had been forced to find ways to work together. All these years later, my relationship with Nuharu was best expressed in the saying, "The water in the well does not disturb the water in the river." To survive, it had been necessary for us to watch out for each other. At times, it seemed impossible, especially regarding Teng Chi. Nuharu's status as senior wife gave her authority over his upbringing and education, something that rankled me. Our fight over how to raise Teng Chi had stopped after he ascended the throne, but my bitterness over how ill-prepared the boy had been to continue to poison our relationship. Nuharu pursued contentment in Buddhism, while my own discontentment followed me like a shadow. My spirit kept escaping my will. I read the book Nuharu had sent me, The Proper Conduct of an Imperial Widow, but it did little to bring me peace. After all, I was from Wuhu, the lake of luxurious weeds. I couldn't be who I was not, although I spent my life trying. Learn to be the soft kind of wood, Orchid, Mother taught me when I was a young girl. The soft blocks are carved into statues of Buddha and goddesses. The hard ones are made into coffin boards. I had a drawing table in my room with ink, freshly mixed paint, brushes, and rice paper. After each day's audience, I came here to work. My paintings were for my son. They were given as gifts in his name. They served as his ambassadors and spoke for him whenever a situation became too humiliating. China was forced to beg for extensions of payments of so-called war compensation imposed on us by foreign powers. The paintings also helped to ease the resentment toward my son over land taxes. The governors of several states had been sending messages that their people were poor and could not afford to pay. The Imperial Tile storehouse has long been empty. I cried decrees issued in my son's name. The taxes we have collected have gone to foreign powers, so their fleets will not set anchor in our waters. My brother-in-law, Prince Kung, complains that his new Board of Foreign Affairs had run out of space in which to store debt seekers' dunning letters. The foreign fleets have repeatedly threatened to re-enter our waters, he warned. It was my eunuch, Auntie Hai's idea to use my paintings as gifts, to buy time, money, and understanding. Auntie Hai had served me since my first day in the Forbidden City, when, as a boy, just 13, he'd surreptitiously offered me a drink of water for my parched throat. It was a brave act, and he had my loyalty and trust ever since. His idea for the paintings was brilliant, and I couldn't paint fast enough. I sent one as a birthday gift to General Sing Cao Fan, the biggest warlord in China who dominated the country's military. I wanted the general to know that I appreciated him, although I recently demoted him in my son's name under pressure from the courts to pro-Manchu conservatives who called themselves Iron Hats. The Iron Hats could not stand the fact that the Han Chinese, through hard work, were gaining power. I wanted General Singh to know that I meant him no harm and that I was aware that I had wronged him. My son Tung Chi could not rule without you, was the message my painting sent. I signed my name in fine calligraphy. Above it, I put my signature stamped in red ink. I had stone stamps in different sizes and shapes. Besides the stamp, which was given to me by my husband, the rest described my titles. Empress of China, Empress of Holy Kindness, Empress of the Western Palace, Empress Su Si was the one I used most often. These stamps were important to collectors. To make the artwork easier to sell, I would leave out the name in my dedication, unless otherwise requested. Anyone who examined my paintings could see their flaws. My brush strokes showed I lacked practice, if not talent. My handling of ink revealed that I was merely a beginner. The nature of a rice paper painting allows no mistakes, which meant that I could be spending hours on a piece, work late into the night, and one lousy stroke would ruin the entire thing. After months of working on my own, I hired an artist tutor whose job it was to cover my flaws. Landscapes and flowers were my subjects. I also painted birds, usually in pairs. I would place them in the center of the frame. They would perch on the same or separate branches, as if having a chat. In vertical compositions, one bird would sit on the top branch and look down, and the other would be on the bottom branch looking up. I spent most of my time on the feathers. Pink, orange, and lime green were my favorite feather colors. The tone was always warm and cheerful. Auntie Hai suggested that I paint peonies, lotus blossoms, and chrysanthemums. He said that I was good at painting these, but I knew he meant that they were easier to sell. A tip I learned from my artist tutor was that the stamps could be used to cover flaws. Since I had flaws everywhere, I applied a number of stamps to each painting. When I was dissatisfied and wanted to start over again, Auntie Hai reminded me that quantity should be my objective. He helped me make the stamps look interesting. When I felt there was nothing I could do to save a work, my tutor would take over. My tutor worked mostly on backgrounds. She would add leaves and branches to cover my bad parts and would add accents to my birds and flowers. One would think that her fine strokes would make mine an embarrassment, but she applied her skill to only harmonize the music. Her artistry saved my worst paintings. It was amusing to watch her painstakingly try to match my amateur strokes. My mind often wandered to my son as I was painting. At night, it became difficult to concentrate. I would imagine Tung Chi's face as he lay in bed and wondered what he was dreaming. When my desire to be with him became desperate, I would put down my brush and run to Tung Chi's palace, 4 courtyards from my own, too impatient to wait for Auntie Hai to light the lanterns. I would rush through the darkness, bumping and bruising myself on walls and arches, until I arrived at my child's bedside. There, beside my sleeping son, I would check his breathing and stroke his head with my ink-stained hands. When the servant lit little candles, I would take one and hold it close to my son's face. My eyes would trace his lovely forehead, eyelids, nose, and lips. I would bend over and kiss him. My eyes would grow moist as I saw his father's likeness. I would remember when Emperor Xianfeng and I were in love. My favorite moment was still the time when I sweetly tortured him by demanding that he memorize my name. I wouldn't leave Tung Chi until Auntie Hai found me, his long procession of eunuchs trailing behind him, each carrying a giant red lantern. My tutor can paint for me, I would say to Auntie Hai. Nobody will know that I didn't apply the stamps myself. But you would know, the eunuch would reply quietly, and he would escort me back to my palace. What a position Orchid is in. She was one of the lucky ones in that she had the only male child out of all these concubines. Princesses everywhere, one prince. So lucky her, she gets the crown prince. But Yihonala and Nuharu are disputing how to raise this prince. Isn't it interesting that this young prince, 7 years old, is being sent letters about his taxes? Now, we all know that 7-year-old did not set up the taxes. The person in charge really is his blood mother, which is Empress Orchid, Yihonala. She's the one who's actually running the country, which is why she is the last Empress of China. She's the one who's truly in charge. However, Nuharu was the emperor, the late emperor's first wife. She outranks her, technically. But these women now need each other. They are co-mothers to the emperor. They are co-widows to the late emperor. And they are ruling a country that has been imperial for thousands of years, that is on the cusp of being turned upside down. The way of life that's been practiced for generations upon generations is going away. I think here in Western countries, and when I say Western, I mean Canada, I mean America. I would even say Australia. Countries like ours that are a conglomeration of other nations, where we are made up of peoples from many different places, because we separated from imperial rule much sooner than other countries, that tradition that comes with that kind of culture was never embedded in us. But as I read these stories, even if one agrees or disagrees with a way of life, to see thousands of years of a culture completely dissolved and to be a participant, if not the catalyst of that happening, what a position to hold in the history books. Granted, this is historical fiction, but it gives us a really good understanding of what was happening. And I love how An Chi Min uses the composition of the paintings to really explain what's happening. To have the artist master come in and correct Orchid's mistakes. How many mistakes is she going to make that have to be covered up and corrected? But she's in a position that most women will never reach. And she's in a position that she didn't create. But she still has to make the best of it. And she and her longtime rival, Nuharu, are going to have to figure out how they're going to thrive and survive together. Because whether they like it or not, the world that they've known, their parents knew, their grandparents knew, their ancestors knew, is rapidly dissolving. And if they don't change, if they don't adapt, they're not going to survive into the new world. So we'll pick back up with Empress Orchid in the coming weeks. I have so many other books to read. I'm about to embark on a camping trip in the next week, so probably when this actually goes up, camping would have wrapped up probably. But I'm going to do a couple of recordings in the woods because I'm a camping nerd. I like getting out in the woods and cutting down the trees and all that kind of stuff. So who knows what kind of video will come out of the woods. But I think camping nerdity counts as nerdity because I am the well-rounded nerd. You know, one of the things I enjoy about reading so many different types of stories, whether it's going to be about Minka, who's going to obviously be a warrior and have to do something incredible to save the galaxy, or if it's going to be about a woman who is put in an incredible position to try to guide her young son, or reading old stories about how women made it through difficult times of war and triumphed, where society didn't always let them. There are so many great stories out there. And there are so many great ways to be. Like I said in my last video, that Warhammer is for everyone. The arts are for everyone. There is so much out there to explore and enjoy. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Stay open-minded. Explore the different works. Find joy in art in all of the places it exists. Because God knows there's enough negativity out there. So as always, I just shook my whole desk. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Probably won't be wearing makeup in the next one.